The third time Laurel Whitmore left her curtains open, I finally understood that she was not being careless. She was asking to be seen. I stood frozen beside my kitchen window as bright morning sunlight poured into her living room across the narrow space between our houses, and Laurel looked directly at me with tears running down her face. She did not wave. She did not smile. She simply pressed one trembling hand against the glass and held up a small cardboard sign with 4 words written in black marker, "Please don't look away." In that instant, every assumption I had made about the mysterious woman next door collapsed, and I realized that whatever was happening inside her beautiful, silent home was far more painful than anything I could have imagined. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Your support helps our family continue sharing stories that remind people they are never truly alone. My name is Everett Calloway, and I had lived on Linden Street for almost 9 years. The neighborhood was the kind of place where people trimmed their hedges on Saturday mornings, waved politely from driveways, and knew one another just well enough to exchange holiday cards without knowing what kept anyone awake with worry. After my wife, Marlene, died from an aneurysm 2 years earlier, I became one of those people who moved through life without truly participating in it. I worked from home as an architectural draftsman, ate lunch at the same small table, walked to the mailbox at the same time every afternoon, and kept conversations short enough that nobody could ask whether I was doing all right. The truth was that I had stopped believing all right was something I would ever feel again. Grief had not destroyed my life dramatically. It had simply emptied it, room by room, until silence became easier than hope. Laurel moved into the pale blue house next door in early spring. She appeared to be in her late 30s, with auburn hair that she often twisted into a loose knot and a gentle face that seemed caught between exhaustion and determination. On moving day, she arrived with a rented truck, 6 cardboard boxes, 3 battered suitcases, and a teenage boy named Wesley who barely looked up from the ground. There was no husband, no large family helping them unload, and no laughter echoing across the driveway. I watched from my porch as Laurel struggled to carry a bookshelf toward the front steps, then forced myself to cross the lawn and offer assistance. She thanked me with a guarded smile and said they were trying to start fresh. I understood the phrase because I had heard people use it after death, divorce, bankruptcy, illness, and every other disaster that could not be explained comfortably. Starting fresh usually meant something had ended badly. For several weeks, Laurel and Wesley kept mostly to themselves. Wesley left each morning for the local high school and returned in the afternoon with his shoulders hunched beneath an oversized gray sweatshirt. Laurel spent her days arranging the house, filling window boxes with yellow flowers, and sitting at her dining table with stacks of envelopes spread before her. Sometimes I saw her rubbing her temples as she stared at them. Other times she held her phone tightly, listening to someone speak while fear slowly replaced the calm expression on her face. I told myself not to intrude. Everyone carried private burdens, and I had grown skilled at respecting distance because I wanted others to respect mine. Still, I noticed small things. Their porch light never needed to come on because Laurel always closed the house before sunset. Their groceries became fewer each week. Wesley stopped carrying lunch to school. Then Laurel's curtains began staying open. The first time, I thought nothing of it. Sunlight filled her living room, revealing half-unpacked boxes and a framed photograph of Laurel, Wesley, and a broad-shouldered man standing beside a lake. Laurel noticed me near my kitchen sink and quickly drew the curtains. The second time happened 2 days later. She was seated on the floor beside the couch, holding the same photograph against her chest. When she saw me, she looked embarrassed and closed the curtains again. I began avoiding the window because I did not want her to think I was spying. Yet on the third morning, when she looked directly at me and held up that sign, the meaning was unmistakable. She wanted help, but she was afraid to ask for it aloud. That I crossed the narrow yard so quickly that I nearly slipped on the wet grass. Laurel opened the back door before I knocked. Up close, she looked pale and exhausted. Her hands were shaking, and a faint bruise darkened the inside of her wrist. I asked whether she was in danger. She glanced toward the staircase and whispered that Wesley was still at school, which meant the threat was not inside the house. Then she explained that her former husband, Grant, had found them again. She had left him 8 months earlier after years of emotional control, financial manipulation, and threats that never quite crossed the line required for anyone else to recognize how frightened she was. He had never struck her hard enough to send her to a hospital. He had never screamed where neighbors could hear. He simply controlled every bank account, every friendship, every decision, and every breath she took until she no longer trusted herself to choose what groceries to buy without asking permission. Laurel had fled after Grant shoved Wesley against a wall for defending her during an argument. She had taken only what she could fit into their car, found temporary work doing medical billing from home, and moved twice before reaching Linden Street. She believed they were finally safe until anonymous letters began arriving. The first contained a photograph of Wesley leaving school. The second showed Laurel unloading groceries. The third contained a message telling her that she could run from her marriage but not from the consequences of humiliating Grant. She had contacted the police, but because the letters contained no direct threat and Grant lived in another state, they could only document the incidents and advise her to remain alert. That morning, Laurel had found muddy footprints beneath her back window and discovered that the small camera over her porch had been unplugged. I asked why she had not called someone. Laurel gave a broken laugh and admitted that there was nobody left. Grant had spent years convincing friends that she was unstable and family members that she was ungrateful. By the time she left, most people believed his version of their marriage. Even her older sister had told her to stop exaggerating and return home for Wesley's sake. Laurel had opened the curtains because she knew I worked nearby and because something about my quiet routine made me seem safe. She apologized for involving me, as if asking not to be abandoned was an inconvenience. That I wanted to help, but fear tightened around my chest. After Marlene died, I had promised myself never to become responsible for another person's safety or happiness. Losing someone had taught me how little control we possessed, and isolation felt like the only protection against further pain. I told Laurel we should call the police again and suggested she stay somewhere else. My words sounded practical, but even I heard the distance in them. Laurel nodded, thanked me, and looked toward the floor. She had not asked me to solve her entire life. She had only asked me not to look away, and I was already retreating. Then I noticed the framed photograph on a nearby table. The broad-shouldered man beside the lake was not Grant. Laurel explained that he was her father, who had died when she was 23. He had once told her that courage did not always look like fighting. Sometimes courage looked like opening a door and admitting you could not stand alone. The word struck something buried inside me. Marlene had said almost the same thing during the final year of her life, when she kept urging me to accept help with my struggling business. I had refused because I thought strength meant handling everything alone. After she died, that same stubbornness became my prison. I called the police and stayed until an officer arrived. Together, we documented the footprints, the unplugged camera, and the letters. I installed 2 spare security cameras from my garage and connected them to Laurel's phone. That afternoon, I walked to Wesley's school so he would not return alone. He was suspicious at first, but when he saw his mother waiting safely on the porch, relief briefly softened his guarded expression. Laurel told him what had happened. Instead of panicking, Wesley became angry. He blamed himself for their situation, believing Grant had pursued them because he had challenged him. Laurel held her son and told him that protecting someone from cruelty never made the cruelty his fault. Watching them, I felt ashamed of how many people lived under the weight of blame that belonged to someone else. For the next several days, I became part of their routine. I checked the cameras each morning, drove Wesley to school, and sat with Laurel while she contacted a legal advocate who helped her begin the process of obtaining a protective order. My neighbor, Mrs. Eddington, noticed the activity and asked questions. At first, Laurel was terrified of being judged, but I told Mrs. Eddington enough to explain that we needed additional eyes on the street. By the end of the afternoon, 4 neighbors had exchanged phone numbers and agreed to watch the house. The quiet politeness of Linden Street changed into something more meaningful. Curtains opened. Porch chairs turned toward the road. People who had spent years waving from a distance finally began paying attention to one another. Grant arrived on a bright Thursday morning that I was repairing a loose board on Laurel's back steps when a black sedan stopped at the curb. A tall man in an expensive navy coat stepped out carrying a bouquet of white roses. His appearance was calm, almost charming, but Laurel went rigid the moment she saw him. Wesley was at school, and the police had warned Grant by phone not to contact her while the protective order request was pending. He ignored that warning and walked toward the house as though he still owned it. Grant smiled when he saw me and asked Laurel whether she had recruited another lonely man to rescue her. His tone was gentle, but every word was designed to humiliate. Laurel stood behind the screen door, gripping the frame. I told Grant he needed to leave. He laughed and said the matter was between husband and wife. Laurel corrected him, reminding him that the divorce was nearly final. His smile disappeared. He stepped closer and lowered his voice, telling her that Wesley's future would be ruined if she continued making accusations. He claimed he had evidence that she was unstable and unfit to raise their son. Laurel's face drained of color because this was how he controlled her, not through open violence, but through certainty that he could rewrite reality faster than she could defend it. For one terrible moment, I nearly stepped aside. Grant was polished, composed, and confident. I understood why people had believed him. Then I looked at Laurel's open curtains and remembered the sign pressed against the glass. "Please don't look away." I moved between Grant and the door and told him the security cameras were recording everything. At that exact moment, Mrs. Eddington appeared on her porch with her phone raised. 2 other neighbors stepped into their driveways. Grant glanced around and realized Laurel was no longer isolated. His expression changed from charm to rage so quickly that every camera captured it. He knocked the flower pot from the railing, grabbed my jacket, and threatened to make us regret interfering. The police arrived less than 3 minutes later because Laurel had already activated the emergency button on her phone. Grant was arrested for violating the no-contact warning, property damage, harassment, and assault. More importantly, his outburst was recorded from 3 angles, along with his attempt to threaten Laurel into silence. The footage did what Laurel's words alone had not been allowed to do. It revealed the man beneath the performance. The days that followed were not magically easy. Grant hired attorneys, challenged every allegation, and accused Laurel of manipulating the neighborhood against him. Laurel had moments when she nearly withdrew her complaint because she feared what the conflict was doing to Wesley. During one of those mornings, she sat at my kitchen table and said she was tired of proving that her fear was real. I told her something I had taken too long to learn: people who demand endless proof of another person's pain are often searching for permission to ignore it. Laurel did not need everyone to believe her. She needed enough truth, enough evidence, and enough support to keep moving forward. Wesley struggled in a different way. He began skipping classes and got into a fight after another student mocked his family. When the school threatened suspension, he admitted that anger was the only emotion that did not make him feel powerless. I understood him more than he realized. Grief had made me angry too, though I had hidden mine beneath silence instead of bruised knuckles. I began taking him with me on small drafting jobs around the neighborhood. He had a natural eye for measurements and design. Over time, he stopped seeing himself as a frightened boy running from his father and began imagining a future in which he could build things that lasted. Laurel's protective order was granted in early summer. Grant eventually accepted a legal settlement that restricted contact with Wesley to supervised arrangements approved by the court. Laurel did not celebrate the outcome as a victory. She cried in the courthouse hallway because even necessary endings could break a person's heart. She had once loved Grant. Wesley had once trusted him. Recognizing cruelty did not erase every good memory that had come before it. Healing required Laurel to accept that she could grieve what the marriage should have been without returning to what it had become. My own healing unfolded more quietly. One afternoon, while helping Laurel repaint her dining room, I finally spoke about Marlene. I told her how guilty I felt for missing the warning signs before her aneurysm, though every doctor had assured me there had been no obvious signs to notice. I confessed that I had spent 2 years believing love had failed because it could not save her. Laurel listened without trying to repair the unrepairable. Then she reminded me that love was not measured only by whether someone stayed. Sometimes it was measured by what remained inside us after they were gone. That sentence changed the shape of my grief. I began opening boxes of Marlene's belongings that I had kept sealed in the attic. I donated her medical equipment, gave her books to the local library, and kept the yellow scarf she wore on the day we bought our house. Laurel helped me plant marigolds in Marlene's neglected garden. Wesley rebuilt the broken wooden bench near the fence. Nothing replaced my wife, and nothing needed to. The empty places in my life did not disappear, but they stopped being the only places I could see. By autumn, Laurel found a full-time position at a nearby clinic. Wesley's grades improved, and he began applying to colleges with architecture programs. The neighborhood remained watchful, but fear no longer governed the house next door. Laurel kept her curtains open most mornings, not as a cry for help, but because sunlight filled the rooms she had chosen for herself. Sometimes she would look across the yard and smile when she saw me making coffee. It became a simple ritual between us, a quiet acknowledgement that being witnessed could be a form of love even before anyone found the courage to name it. Nearly a year after the morning with the cardboard sign, Laurel invited the neighbors to a daytime garden lunch. Tables stretched across both our lawns, children ran through sprinklers, and Mrs. Eddington told the story of Grant's arrest so dramatically that everyone laughed. Wesley presented me with a framed drawing of our 2 houses connected by an arched footbridge. Beneath it, he had written that some neighbors shared fences, while others helped you cross them. Laurel found me standing alone beside Marlene's marigolds later that afternoon. She thanked me again for coming across the yard that morning. I told her the truth, she had saved me too. Her open curtains had forced me to see that hiding from other people's pain had not protected me from my own. It had only made the world smaller. Laurel slipped her hand into mine, and for the first time since Marlene's death, I did not feel that accepting warmth was a betrayal. Love was not a single room that could belong to only one memory. It was a house with more windows than I had ever allowed myself to open. Before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment about a time when someone saw your pain, believed you, or refused to look away. Your words may remind another person that asking for help is not weakness and that standing beside someone can change the direction of an entire life. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Laurel once believed an open curtain exposed her vulnerability, but it became the doorway to her freedom. I once believed closing myself away would protect what remained of my heart, but it only kept healing outside. In the end, neither of us was rescued by a grand miracle. We were saved by smaller things, a handwritten sign, a neighbor who crossed the grass, a community that finally paid attention, and the courage to believe that no one should have to suffer unseen.